Welcome in, good people, to another episode of Real Spill with the Truth Wins. You already know the deal by now. It's your boy Scott Procter, joined as always by Ellis L. Williams, who covers the Carolina Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. L, it's been a little minute, man. How we doing?
Yeah, man, had to disappear for a little bit, but the Panthers seem to always bring us back into the news, right? So I hope the postseason's been treating you well, man, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, man, it has. I can't complain too much, man. The Panthers, as you said, have given us plenty to talk about here in this edition of Real Spill. Before we get into that, man, we'll start how we always start off these episodes, and that's with a little bump and run, man. We got to talk a little bit about conference championship weekend, what we witnessed over this past weekend. Let's talk a little about that. And before we get into the Super Bowl matchup, let's talk about these other two Final Four teams. Ellis, I'll ask it this way, man. Are the Bengals or the 49ers more likely, I should say, to return to their respective conference championship games next season?
Scott, I think that's a really sharp question. And you have to start where a lot of these conversations usually begin, and that's the quarterback position. And we saw what happened to the 49ers and Brock Purdy not even being able to really run an offense after Johnson was knocked out of the game with a concussion, which then just opens the Pandora's box that is the question marks of the 49ers quarterback position. Is Trey Lance able to make the throws necessary to have a Kyle Shanahan offense? Is Brock Purdy the guy next year? What about Jimmy Garoppolo? It seems to be the same thing every year with that team. Then you look at the Bengals, and you know who they got, man. It's Joey Cool, right? And on top of that, they got one more, right? They got one more cheap year of T. Higgins, 3 more cheap seasons of Jamar Chase. They worked at rebuilding that offensive line this past year. Obviously, it got a little banged up this postseason run, but as long as they keep allocating assets to that offensive line, I think the Bengals are going to be a threat for 2, 3, 4, 5 years here, if not longer, and have the better chance of getting back to that conference championship game, despite all the young and up and coming quarterbacks in the AFC.
Absolutely, man. Joe Burrow told us, man. He said as long as he is there, the window is open in Cincinnati, and he ain't lied not one time. I heard Joe Burrow tell one single lie, man, and that's facts, man. I think the Bengals are going to be here for a long haul as long as number 9 is under center for them, like you said. But another thing, like you said at the end, the path to least resistance, as we know, is in the NFC. We know Patrick Mahomes, number 15, Dumbledore. We're going to talk about him plenty later. He going to be there. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to be a kind of revolving door as far as I'm concerned, as far as who is going to meet the Kansas City Chiefs in the conference title game. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of other talented up-and-coming AFC quarterbacks. But in the NFC, man, with Kyle Shanahan, clearly it doesn't matter really who's playing quarterback unless you're down to your last dead option. That team is a Super Bowl caliber team with Jimmy G, with Brock Purdy, and maybe in Trey Lance. That remains to be seen. But I think whoever you plug in, if Kyle Shanahan is comfortable enough giving the reins to whoever that is, the rest of that roster, particularly I can't even say on one side of the ball because they got superstars on both sides of the ball. The talent on that roster is loaded enough to where if they can just plug a Jimmy G, a Brock Purdy, something like that at the quarterback position, I'm expecting to be a Final Four team, with that core intact, best. So that's going to be interesting to watch. The 49ers offseason is going to be as interesting as anybody in the NFL to watch this offseason. I'm going to be having a close eye on that. We got to talk about the Super Bowl matchup, though, man. Should the Chiefs or the Eagles be favored this upcoming Super Bowl? Obviously, Kansas City open as 2-point underdogs. That probably a little bit to do with Mahomes' ankle injury that's still up in the air. But, what do you make of this matchup early on?
This has been a tough one to diagnose. You look at the two paths of how these teams got here, right? For the Chiefs to go through Trevor Lawrence, to go through Joe Burrow, to go through a Bengals team that had to go through Josh Allen. Right. You can see how the Chiefs have just been more tried and tested, right? But that necessarily isn't a reason to knock the Eagles, who just had to win another NFC East game in the playoffs, beating the Giants, right? And then, as we already said, beating a 49ers team that really did not have 70% of its game plan available to them 7 minutes into the first quarter.
Absolutely.
With all of that being said, I understand why the odds makers favor the Eagles. This roster, offensive line, defensive line specifically, they're just monsters. I mean, I'm watching that NFC Championship game, and I've forgotten Ndamukong Suh signed with them in like week 10. I mean, these are just
the defensive line, man. They got so many veterans on that unit, and so talented up front on that side of the ball.
It's so beastie. And then Jalen Hurts, say less, right? I mean, he's been proven at every level that he is a championship competitor and winner. But then you got Dumbledore on the other side, 15 for the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And that's really what this is coming down to, right? It's almost like a LeBron James versus the field, Tiger Woods versus the field.
Yeah.
That's how Patrick Mahomes is starting to feel. Right. I'm not sure the Eagles are the Golden State Warriors. So as of right now, I think the Chiefs should be favored. But look, this is a field goal game as the whole playoffs have been.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. Like you said, I understand why the Eagles opened as favorites, but that don't mean I don't agree with it because they don't got number 15 on their team, and they certainly haven't seen a talent like Patrick Mahomes lately. I believe the best quarterback probably they faced this season, playoffs included, would be Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers played pretty damn well in that game before he left that game early with injury. I believe that was a 44-33 final. Obviously, a pretty, competitive game. And obviously, we saw over the last few weeks, obviously, the Eagles have had a bye in the first round of the playoffs. They went against Daniel Jones, and they went against a combination of Brock Purdy and Josh Johnson. Brock Purdy being, unable to throw the football for the majority of that game. So I don't know. You mentioned it. I don't know if this Eagles defense in particular has been tested, at least recently, and certainly haven't been tested by the powers of Dumbledore, by Patrick Mahomes. So I think for that reason alone, especially with another week to nurse up that high ankle injury a little bit, I don't really see why the Chiefs shouldn't be favored in this game, albeit I expect it to be close. I expect the Eagles to be very much competitive, but this is going to be a great game, man. This is going to be another, legacy game for Patrick Mahomes. And if the Eagles are able to pull this one off, man, I mean, they have to enter next season as the favorite to repeat. You know what I'm saying? So
no doubt,
it's going to be interesting to watch, man. I can't wait for this matchup, man. But we got to move on, man. We got to move on to the big spill, man, because it's been a juicy last couple of days and weeks for the Carolina Panthers franchise. They recently hired Frank Reich as their new head coach. Frank Reich obviously came over previously, was fired mid-season by the Indianapolis Colts. Let's start there, Ellis, man. How did Carolina ultimately land on Reich as their next head coach over the likes of Steve Wilkes and others?
Yeah, I think two really important things happened. First, you have to understand the mindset that David Tepper and the Panthers brass went into this coaching search with. They wanted an offensive guy. And David Tepper spoke yesterday about the search and said, whether it was an offensive guy, a defensive guy, or special teams, we found the best guy. We'll find out if that's true later on. Yeah. But that is a little bit of a hedge in the sense that there clearly was a preference that the search committee came into with this. And then I think the second most important domino to fall was Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson removing himself from the head coaching candidate list. I think that's already 3 weeks ago to this point, right?
Is he a real candidate for this job here, Ben Johnson?
I believe he was, because the two things that happened there was he was available, right? It wasn't like Shane Steichen, who with the Eagles couldn't even do his second interview until this past Monday. The Lions didn't make the playoffs. Ben Johnson could be hired immediately. And from what I heard and I've gathered, he really impressed with that interview. And as has been the trend since Sean McVay took over the league 6 years ago now, Tepper was fascinated with finding that next up-and-coming offensive mind, and that you can't knock him for that. I understand the copy and paste mentality there, and the Lions have had a really impressive offense, specifically this past season, right? Mm-hmm. But when Ben Johnson pulled out, that allowed the search committee to refocus on its list of candidates, and then it realized the importance of having a former head coach, a retread, if you will, and a person in Frank Reich, 61 years old, experienced, proven, a winning record in Indianapolis, 2 postseason appearances, despite having Andrew Luck abruptly retire 1 year into his tenure there. We can unpack why things fell apart in Indianapolis for Frank Reich, but when you just look at the history of the NFL and the head coaches that get a second chance at this, the Pete Carrolls, the Andy Reids, the Bill Belichick's of the world, Frank Reich's got a lot to prove if that's where he's headed. But just from the history of the league, you tend to know what you're getting in the head coach that gets the second chance compared to rolling the dice with a coordinator who could end up being Sean McVay, could be somewhere in the middle like a Zach Taylor, or could be a Matt Patricia and completely bottom out, and then you're back to square one. So a real safe hire, you know what you're getting. And then the upside will be in how he builds the staff, how they find the quarterback, and then him continuing to form an offense that is going to complement the collection of weapons that the Panthers have already formed.
Absolutely. It's hard to hate this hire for the Carolina Panthers,
Great
man.
way to put it.
It's a safe move. It's a safe move. And again, you mentioned there at the end is that, priority number one for this team is figuring out the quarterback position. If there's anybody, at least on the available market on the head coaching search, who has experience, helping that position grow and evolve, it's Frank Reich. And obviously he's going to have a lot of work to do to first off identify that guy, and then first off build that guy up to the type of quarterback that the Panthers can win a lot of games with. But the cupboard isn't dry. I think there's a lot of places worse than the Carolina Panthers in terms of talent on the roster, so he's going to have some stuff to work with. But I wanted to ask about, obviously, LSU were at Tuesday's introductory press conference. Frank Reich being introduced, obviously, is the Panthers head coach. What did you take away from that, watching him kind of address the Carolina media for the first time, and maybe how he's kind of learned from his time in Indianapolis?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was short and to the point. I mean, Frank Reich does have a history as a pastor, nonetheless, in the Charlotte area. But comparing him to the former head coach, who tend to ramble at times and be long-winded. Right. But who was a hell of a storyteller and could really pull you in that way. Frank Reich really wasn't about a lot of that nonsense. When I got an opportunity to ask him football questions, he was ready to talk ball. He plans on having this Panthers offense be run first to dominate up front, which is already a strength that they've shown this past season, right? He wants to be multiple in their play action and RPO concepts. And then he stressed the importance of a vertical passing game. And all of that then is buttoned up in the way that he wants to collaborate from ownership to the front office with general manager Scott Fitterer, and then to his staff, which he is still putting together, and then ultimately the quarterback, which we have touched on and will continue to touch on, right? So absolutely. From what I gather about Frank Reich is this is a coach who understands this is probably his last chance at this job, at the head coaching position. He's more than ready for it, and he understands the collaborative process that it's going to take to put the Panthers in the best position to win. And he doesn't want to just be there every once in a while. He wants to build a consistent winner. And when you look at the state of the NFC South, especially now after Tom Brady's retirement is officially official, there's a chance here
wide open,
for the Panthers to just be one of those teams under a first-year head coach that make that jump and are immediate playoff team with championship aspirations year 2, year 3 as Reich continues.
No doubt about it, man. I got to touch here, and we got to talk a little bit about Steve Wilkes, who served as the Panthers interim head coach to end this season here. Given the many players who spoke out in support of Wilkes, kind of voicing their support and wanting him to stay on, do you think there's any resentment coming from the players or any backlash from this decision that, obviously Steve Wilkes did a hell of a job, as we talked about on the show, a Charlotte native? Do you think there's any, kind of backlash from the locker room from this decision?
I didn't get the sense of that. And there were about 6 or 7 Panthers players, running back Chuba Hubbard, defensive end Marquise Haynes, left tackle Ike Ekwonu, longtime veteran Dante Jackson, who were at the Reich presser sitting right in front of me. And after Reich got done talking, he went up and shook all their hands. I spoke to safety Jeremy Chin after the presser and said Reich had already reached out to him and that he was excited to get to work with somebody who had more than 30 years of NFL experience, 14 as a player, 17 as a coach now. And Chin said it. He thinks that Reich will have a real pulse of the locker room due to his playing background. And not that Steve Wilkes didn't have that, but it's just important to differentiate the two in the sense that they can have respect and love for Steve Wilkes and everything that they accomplished. But as all the players in that locker room found out this year, from the firing of Matt Rule to the trading of Christian McCaffrey, a lot of the things we heard this year from Panthers players was the young guys, the Jeremy Chins, the Ike Ekwonus, the foundation of this team, Brian Burns, realizing the business side of this game, of the NFL, and they are going to be complete professionals in the sense that Reich, again, being an elder statesman, brings that authority and really father figure type leader role that Steve Wilkes had. Now, if they would have brought in a 37-year-old, things may have been a little different. But I just think the optics and just the way Reich presents himself, real stoic, real buttoned up, will offset any potential hard feelings. How Steve Wilkes feels about this is completely different, but how the Panthers locker room is going to respond to Frank Reich, I have a good sense that they're going to be able to pick up right where they left off under Steve Wilkes.
No doubt about it. I would have loved to see Steve Wilkes retain the head coaching job here, but again, you could have done a lot worse than Frank Reich if you're the Carolina Panthers. So I hope that works out for them. Absolutely. We're going to move on, but stay right here with the Carolina Panthers for our home with foul section. Now that the Panthers do have their new head coach, let's talk a little about what their next moves are going to be. And let's start here, man, because I know you recently had a column on the Charlotte Observer talking about the best options at quarterback for Reich and the Panthers this season and beyond. What do you think that is? Who do you think that is? And do you think that quarterback option becomes via free agency or the draft?
Yeah, before Reich, you would say that this was most likely going to come from the draft. But now as you look at Reich and the options that he's going to have available to him, I think that this quarterback room is going to take on multiple iterations of itself, meaning I envision them having 3 quarterbacks all at very different points in their career.
Yeah.
Matt Corral, already in Carolina, under contract, of course, only entering his 2nd year, and really will be his 1st year, considering he had a Liz Frank injury in the preseason and didn't get a snap this season. So he's on a completely different trajectory than a veteran that I suspect that they'll bring in. Perhaps that's Sam Darnold. I see my Twitter mentions bring up Carson Wentz.
I did see somebody bring up Wentz, right? And he had to preface it like, "Hey, I'm serious too." By the way, who are bringing this up?
I know, right? Yeah. And it makes you wonder. It makes you think because as you talk to people inside the building, you understand that a lot of this league is about who you're familiar with. And now that they have a new leader, Reich has got his own bucket of talent and specifically quarterbacks that he's familiar and comfortable with. Look no further than Jacob Eason, who actually did throw 3 passes for the Panthers this year in that Rams game, spent most of his time on the practice squad and is now back. He's got background with Frank Reich. Perhaps he's on this roster, and then they go and draft a guy. So they're going to explore all their options, but it's not going to be in the sporadic way that Matt Rule did it, because the same as the Panthers were building their quarterback room and trying to throw as many darts at the proverbial quarterback board, the Colts were doing the same exact thing. Yeah. And both of those roadmaps got Rule and Reich fired from their respective jobs. Yeah. So Reich touched on it. He learned a lot from his time in Indianapolis. And to me, that all lines up for this team selecting a quarterback in the 1st round of the 2023 NFL draft.
Gotcha. Who do you think that is? Obviously, the Carolina Panthers have the number 9 overall pick in April's draft. What do you think is the likely target? And also, in addition to that, is it possible that they trade up, or you think they stay pat?
Yeah, I think everything's on the board here. 2 things need to happen. First of all, and this evaluation process is now starting as early as yesterday, as Panthers general manager Scott Fitterer was headed to Mobile for the Senior Bowl. They're going to start figuring out what quarterback best fits them. Until they identify that guy, it's tough to gauge whether they're moving up all the way to 1, which would take a king's ransom to do. Not saying they don't have the assets, which is something we can get into in a second, but you just don't know where that guy is necessarily. I reported back in November that owner David Tepper had eyes for Will Levis. I mean, we've already seen him mocked as high as number 2 overall. Yeah. And then there's the Anthony Richardson side of all of this, the wild card, as we've deemed him since October, who's already getting tagged to the Panthers at 9. And I got to mention, obviously, CJ Stroud, who I think would be the best fit for the Carolina Panthers. No way he's there at 9, but they have the ammo to move up. So if they stay pat at 9, we're looking at an Anthony Richardson, Will Levis window. If they're moving up, then that tells you either they fell in love with one of those 2 guys I just mentioned and don't want to risk losing them, or they've got eyes on the consensus 1 or 2 guy.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I was going to ask you too, like which quarterback of those top 4 at least, you think is the best fit. But I agree with you. I think it's Stroud. I think he kind of brings what Reich is going to be looking for in the type of quarterback that is going to be able to run the offense that he's most likely going to bring, to the Panthers. So again, like you said, everything's on the table, man. Yeah. And I think they're in an enviable position with the number 9 overall pick, with assets to move up as well if they want to. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they address these next couple months leading up to April's draft. I want to ask too, because obviously quarterback is the most important, but it's not the only factor to success in the NFL and with the Carolina Panthers. What do you think the number one offseason priority for Carolina should be that doesn't involve a quarterback?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple adjectives or synonyms for priority. Storyline, thing to watch. To me, this is all about Brian Burns. What are the Panthers going to do with Brian Burns? Is he going to get that market-setting deal that a guy who was flirting with 2 first-round picks as a trade value back at the deadline would likely command? And when an agent sees that, he's going to the bank with it, right? So is Brian Burns going to reset the market as an edge rusher? Do the Panthers pay him because they view him as that talent?
Yeah.
Do the Panthers revisit a trade potentially to get more ammo to move up for one of these quarterbacks that we just mentioned, the Bryce Young, the CJ Stroud? Or do they explore everything to a franchise tag? And this goes into the next season, right? Brian Burns, now that we're moving past the head coaching hire, now that we're going to have a while here in between the draft and the season ending, I think he is that next domino to fall. What is his future with the Carolina Panthers, and what does that mean for the team going forward?
Yeah, man. I think he's somebody you got to pay, man. You got to show that back to Brian Burns, man. He's earned it, man. Yep. He has been the ultimate professional too, as well. And I think while you're the Carolina Panthers and you don't have a lot of money allocated to the quarterback position, like a lot of other franchises do,
great point.
You can afford to break some bread off to Brian Burns. And again, he's deserved it, man. He's deserving of it both on and off the field. And I think even if you don't pay him, man, that's something that, I mean, you can attest to this 100 times better than I can. But Brian Burns seems like the type of dude who is the leader in that locker room, or if not the leader, one of the many voices / faces of that locker room. And I think a lot of the dudes in that locker room be looking a little sideways if 100%. Brian Burns doesn't get, the contract, the deal that he deserves. So that's going to be fascinating to watch, man. I wasn't really thinking about that, but that's going to be something to watch, man. No doubt, man. Let's move on here, man, to nickel and dime, man. Talk about who was the 10 over the last weekend. Who wasn't even worth a damn nickel, man. Let's start with you, man, and your dime of the week. Talk to me.
Yeah, man. Look, championship football means the big dogs come out and eat. And Hassan Reddick of the Philadelphia Eagles had been doing it all year. I saw him eat as a Panther just a season ago. They were not able to retain him. He went home, a Temple grad, and now is en route to potentially win Super Bowl MVP for the Eagles. Right? What a story! What a story that would be. And before I close on this Hassan Reddick point, I think his performance in that championship game, an underlining point of his performance to me is teams should be hesitant to draft these smaller quarterbacks with the way championship teams are building these defensive lines. I don't know if it was Reddick who hit Josh Johnson on the concussion that knocked him out. But he had that sack and a near strip fumble on him earlier. Yeah. Point being, he was the one who hit Brock Purdy on the UCL injury.
Yeah,
these smaller quarterbacks are going to take a beating. That's the game, right? You got to stand in the pocket and throw the football. It's not a knock on the 49ers protection necessarily, but they got to be able to withstand the beatings that guys like Hassan Reddick are going to put on them. Can Bryce Young do that? I don't know. I wouldn't want to see Hassan Reddick if I'm Bryce Young anytime soon. That man's on a tear and is my dime.
Yeah, man, that's a fascinating point, man. It's all facts too, and again, it makes you wonder about guys like Tua and Bryce Young who are coming into the league. And I know a lot of people say scouts love to put too much stock into size, but again, at the quarterback position nowadays, when you got dudes flying off the edge who are grown men, 6'6 plus, 250 plus, running 4.4, 4.5, coming at you to take you out of the game. Man, you got to have some size, man. At this point, it appears. And if you don't, you better be able to get out of the pocket and get out of jams with quickness, man. So that's a fascinating point, my boy. But in terms of my dime, man, you already know what's going on, man. It's Dumbledore, man. This number 15, man. This Patrick Mahomes, man. This man was on one leg, man, battling a high ankle sprain. Obviously, Travis Kelce was out there with him. But you lose Juju during the game. You lose Kadarius Toney during the game. You lose McCole Hardman during the game, who already came into the game banged up. My man's Patrick Mahomes is throwing to Sky Moore, rookie Sky Moore, and Marcus Kemp on big third downs in crunch time, who Marcus Kemp has more career tackles than catches. I want people to realize that as well.
Well, if you don't stop.
That's who this man Patrick Mahomes was throwing to in a do or die AFC Championship game against a stellar defense, by the way, against the quarterback in Joe Burrow, who we all love, who was throwing, for comparison's sake, was throwing to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You know, that man,
crazy.
Dumbledore, as you love to call him, man. I love that nickname, man. Came out on top, proved again why he's an all-time great, arguably the best playoff quarterback already, sans Tom Brady. So Mahomes did it, man. I'm gonna go with my nickel here moving forward. And it's nobody who played this past weekend, but it's a franchise who made a pretty big decision over the last week, and that's the New York Jets, man, because I'm confused. Quite frankly, I'm just confused, man, because you had a championship caliber defense this season, showed real flashes of, you know, kind of turning the page as a franchise, and the quarterback position held you back. And what do you do in response to that? You hire Nathaniel Hackett. You rush to hire Nathaniel Hackett, who had maybe the single worst head coaching season in NFL history. What played some role, depending on how much you blame, credit you want to give him, played some role in the Denver Broncos having the worst scoring offensive season and Russell Wilson having the worst season of his career this past year. I don't know what the Jets are doing hiring Nathaniel Hackett. Again, rushing to hire this man when you don't even really know who your quarterback is going to be moving forward. That move made no sense to me. A franchise that seemed to be going in the right direction, that seemed like a backwards move. The Jets are my nickel of the week for hiring Nathaniel Hackett as their offensive coordinator.
That's got Aaron Rodgers written all over it, doesn't it?
And thank you for bringing that up, because I had it in my notes, but I forgot to bring it up because I didn't look at it, man. And if they did that with the idea that they could lure Aaron Rodgers to New York, they should be ashamed of themselves, because they should learn from Denver and their mistakes last year, because obviously that was part of the reason they hired Hackett. And if, you know, again, if Rodgers doesn't end up going to New York, man, they're gonna look worse than Denver did last year for doing the same thing and hiring that man as their head coach. So
before I get to my nickel, hold on. I smell something here. You smell it? That's desperation. That's desperation in the air, brother.
It got a stench to it.
It comes all the way from New York, man. It reached me here in Charlotte, dog. Now that you're putting it for me, I'm smelling that desperation, homie.
Damn shame.
We're gonna find out. On that same point of desperation, my nickel is the Cincinnati Bengals special teams, who had one job as the game was winding down. One job: kick the ball out of bounds or give the punt some hang time and force a fair catch. Instead, you deliver a kick right down the middle of the field with zero hang time, allowing one of the Chiefs' only remaining playmakers, aside from number 15, to get his hands on the football.
Shout out Sky Moore.
And set up a Patrick Mahomes game-winning drive that really only needed one completion, a short scramble, and a 15-yard unnecessary roughness penalty as he was running out of bounds. All of that could have been prevented if you just punt the ball either out of bounds or put something under it. I mean, where's Coach Preef when we need him, man? Where's Coach
Preef? Where you at? They needed that man in Cincinnati last week, for real, man. But that just goes to show you, man, the little in-game decisions, man, can impact a Super Bowl. It can impact a Super Bowl run, can impact the whole AFC Championship game, man. Those little decisions by coordinators and whatnot, they're big, man. They big dividends. I love that nickel, man. We're gonna end here. We're gonna finish things up. Run through a quick 2-minute offense, man. I want to get your take. Obviously, Chiefs, Eagles in the Super Bowl, man. What do you think is the most intriguing positional matchup that we'll see take place on Super Bowl Sunday?
To me, it is Patrick Mahomes versus that pass rush on one ankle, man. I mean, we've seen him be able to slide and maneuver against anything, but this is going to be the most fierce rush he faces. I know that's sort of discounting the Chiefs' offensive line. Like, I'm just already saying that the Chiefs have no chance of blocking the Eagles. Yeah, that is what I'm saying. Yeah. Patrick Mahomes versus the defensive line.
That's hilarious, man. That's facts, man. That's gonna be something to watch, man, because we know last time Patrick Mahomes and Chiefs were in the Super Bowl, I would say that's the single biggest reason that they didn't beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is because the Chiefs offensive line were not able to block JPP and those dudes
100%.
up front. They're going to have to do that to beat the Eagles. I got a similar idea, man. I got a similar thinking, but it's flipped, man. I'm looking specifically at this Eagles offensive line, which is probably the best offensive line. It's the best offensive line in football with 2 future Hall of Famers, man. Right. Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson will one day be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, man. The best unit in the NFL going against that Chiefs pass rush, which is sneakily super really good, obviously led by Chris Jones, who is a defensive player of the year candidate. We saw what he did in AFC Championship Sunday. So him, Frank Clark, George Karlaftis, the rookie out of Purdue, who I wasn't really high on, but clearly he showed that he's a player. GM Brett Veach knows what he's doing, drafting these young studs. So that Eagles offensive line versus this Chiefs pass rush, who actually had the second most sacks in the NFL this season, right behind the Philadelphia Eagles, man. So this Chiefs defensive line, this pass rush can get after it. It's gonna be fascinating to watch this offensive line of the Eagles and this pass rush of the Chiefs go at it, man. But yeah, man, that's gonna do it for us for this episode of Real Spill, man. Go like, go comment, and subscribe. Shout out to that boy Ellis L. Williams. Go follow his work on the Charlotte Observer. And that's gonna do it for us, man. Your boy Scott Procter, Ellis L. Williams. Catch you next time. Real Spill. Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out our other videos and don't forget to smack that subscribe button down below while you're at it. Also, for more great and original content, head right over to bvmsports.com.